Last night we saw, or this morning more accurately, we saw a long sitting of Parliament. Labor met yesterday as a shadow cabinet and as a caucus and determined our position on the religious discrimination legislation that was before the Parliament. We determined as a matter of principle, something that we hold very dear, that we support the removal or the extension of anti-discrimination legislation to cover discrimination on the basis of religion or on the basis of faith, but we don't believe that should be at a cost of increasing discrimination against other groups. In particular, we were concerned about the impact against students who may be struggling with their gender identity or who have sexual orientation which they are coming to terms with, and which the pressure on a young person at that time should be something that is respected. Labor believes very clearly that we need to respect every child for who they are, that is a fundamental principle that we took into the Parliament and were determined to pursue, along with other amendments to improve the legislation as it stood. The amendment carried will prohibit schools discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, relationship or marital status. That makes an enormous difference. It is unfortunate that there has been division over this process. This should have been something that united the country and took us forward as one with respect for our common humanity. We're a diverse nation made up of young and old, people of different ethnicity, different religions, different sexual orientations. We need to respect every Australian for who they are. And Labor will continue to argue for additional amendments in the Senate if the legislation gets there. But I say this about this Prime Minister. The Prime Minister tried to wedge Labor and ended up wedging himself. He could have had constructive dialogue and dealt with the provisions consistent with what he himself had argued. In 2018, during the Wentworth by-election, he said he would protect students. And the Prime Minister wrote to me in December and said, "There is no place in our education system for any form of discrimination against a student on the basis of their sexuality or gender identity." Had the legislation passed without this significant amendment against the government's wishes, it wouldn't have fulfilled that commitment and statement of the Prime Minister. And then, when the amendment was carried, the government, in an act of extraordinary petulance, voted against their own legislation on the floor of the House of Representatives, something that I haven't seen occurred before, because the legislation regarding students, the relevant provision that was amended, came in a separate bill about human rights legislation that the government had moved. I'm very proud of the collective action that Labor took. I'm proud of the fact we were prepared to work with the crossbenchers and with others in the Parliament, including some in the Liberal Party who voted with us in the early hours of this morning. That's a good thing. I say to the government, they need to stop looking for division and look for ways in which we can unite the country and take us forward. Mark?
Thanks very much, Anthony. I'd echo everything that Anthony has said and say that the result, the bills that have now gone to the Senate, could have been so much better than it was. Labor has been ready and willing and able to work with the government for more than 3 years that this has been coming to produce a much better outcome for Australia, one, as Anthony has said, which unites our country, not one which increases division. Of course, Labor was ready and wanting to see added to our set of anti-discrimination laws a law that prohibited discrimination in employment, discrimination in the provision of services based on religious belief. It's long past time that people of faith in our country were protected in that way. But Mr Morrison has resolutely turned his back on Labor's offers to help, resolutely turned his back on any suggestion of bipartisanship. It's been a shocking process through 2 exposure drafts, not one but 2 exposure drafts, a shocking process where acting on recommendations made by Mr Ruddock's panel of inquiry way back in the end of 2018 and going into 2019, the government did the right thing, set up a proper inquiry with the Law Reform Commission, which would have reported in March 2020, only to then turn round and put that on pause repeatedly, so that the Law Reform Commission still hasn't started its inquiry into these important matters. We've tried our best with the limited ability that we have in opposition to improve some of the bad aspects of this bill. We moved amendments late into the morning in the House of Representatives to try and put an anti-vilification provision into this legislation, actually holding Mr Morrison to something that he had said in his second reading speech when he introduced these bills on the 25th of November. He said that he deplored vilification against people of faith. He said that this bill would do something about it, but it does nothing of the kind. And that's why we moved an amendment. Didn't quite get the necessary support from the House of Representatives for that anti-vilification provision to be included in the legislation, but we will try again in the Senate. And so too, we moved an amendment to deal with a dreadful provision dealing with statements of belief, which the government knows is flawed, knows they haven't got right. They know that they shouldn't be seeking to interfere with every single anti-discrimination statute in Australia, and that's what we tried to take out of the legislation last night. Again, we didn't get there, but we will persist with that when this legislation goes to the Senate. And extraordinarily, the other amendment that we put forward, which should have been completely non-contentious, to make sure that there wouldn't be discrimination against older people in Australia who receive in-home care. Almost 1 million Australians, older Australians, receive in-home care. The services from religious providers to them should not be able to be provided with discrimination. We thought at first that there was some error in the bill. This was drawn to our attention by COTA, one of the most important advocates for older people in our community, and extraordinarily the government said no, it was deliberate. They tried to sneak this in, and they persisted with this absurd provision in the bill, which means that while aged care provision in residential care can't be provided with any discrimination, it must be free of discrimination. Apparently, this government wants to say that it will be open to a religious provider of in-home care to discriminate. We think that's wrong, and we will be persisting with that amendment too. But finally, the fourth amendment that we had put up that was ultimately moved, and I thank her for it, by the member for Mayo, Rebecca Sharkey, that succeeded and has meant that we have the excellent outcome now that all children in religious schools will be protected from discrimination. So the battle is not over. Labor will continue to work to improve this legislation.
Thanks.
You both have conceded that this legislation is bad legislation, that it could have been better. What do you say to Australians who are waking up disappointed to see that Labor has ultimately allowed it to pass through the House?
We fixed the major issue that was raised with us by having a majority on the floor of the House of Representatives. Had we simply said, we're just voting against that legislation and not tried to improve it, that would not have occurred, and the legislation would have passed without amendment. That is what we would have been dealing with. As a direct result of the position that we took, this bill has been improved, and students, children in schools will be all protected from discrimination and from any action based upon objections of who they are. I'm very proud of what we've managed to achieve, and those people who argued that we should just vote no and not participate also ignored the fact that the issue of discrimination against people on the basis of their faith is real, and it is something that Labor supports action on. Just like we support removing discrimination on the basis of age, on the basis of gender, on the basis of disability. Labor has a proud record in that area. And two, some people today who might be a woman of Islamic faith are being vilified on the streets because she happens to be wearing a hijab. Someone identifiable, a group of Jewish students being attacked because of their faith. Discrimination against people on the basis of who they are. Ed Husick gave a pretty powerful speech in the Parliament about the discrimination he had applying for a job as a member of the House of Representatives, where the attacks on him when he first ran for Parliament on the basis of his faith were very real and had a real impact. And there are many people of faith who are discriminated against from employment and other areas because of their faith. This is a real issue. It's one that Labor supports action on, but we support action on that without increasing discrimination against other groups.
Will you be satisfied if this legislation actually becomes law and passes through the Senate without any further amendments?
We will be pursuing further amendments, and we've been successful in changing the legislation. As I said, if we have taken the view that some people on social media suggested we should, the legislation, we wouldn't have sat till 5 a.m. trying to improve this legislation. We fought hard, as I have fought every day I've been in this building as a Member of Parliament, for the rights of people to not be discriminated against on the basis of their sexuality or on the basis of who they are. That is something that I have fundamentally fought for. It's something that I believe in, and it's something that Labor believes in. But we also believe that people of faith can suffer from discrimination as well, and they are deserving of protection as well.
Do you not see this to be a little bit of a gamble, hoping that you'll be able to pass additional amendments through the Senate when that isn't guaranteed?
No, I see this as ensuring that we act on the basis of our principles. This isn't our legislation. This is government legislation. What we managed to do on the floor of the House of Representatives is do something that doesn't happen too often, which is to defeat the government on the floor of the House of Representatives. And we did it with a significant majority. We did it by working with crossbenchers and with the goodwill of other people in the Parliament, including some members of the Liberal Party. One of the votes was 62 each in the Parliament as well, and we fell just short. But we'll pursue those issues. It's not our job to sit back, see bad legislation just carried, not participate, not try and improve it, and then just complain about it from the sideline. Our job as the Labor Party is to try to get the best outcomes possible. It's something that we will continue to pursue in a principled way, and we have said that we will insist on any amendments that we carried. We've already carried amendments in the House of Representatives. I expect if there's a debate in the Senate, there are other issues that could be dealt with there.
Can I just ask,
Last one.
can you just quickly summarise some of those key amendments that you'll be pursuing in the Senate?
The amendments that Mark outlined. Thank you.
Thanks very much.